introduce some of our staff. If you don't already know, Andrea Allen is our district director. Good to get to know her. She runs out of the Jonesboro office, but she runs the entire district. So good for her today. So get her card before you leave today. Some of our other staff, you also may know Doug Smith. He's one of our field reps. Also good to get his card. He's a good call to make if you're trying to track me down. We've got two of our staff from Washington that are in this week for the Farm Bill. Our legislative liaison with the Ag Committee is Chris Jones. Does a great job. If you've got questions, he can answer them, and he's really sharp on his policy issues. And then Laura Sussong is also at our DC office. She's our legislative correspondent. She's going to communicate everything to you as needed. And then we have another guy here, Richard. He's really not with our office. He works for the highway department. We picked him up on the way here. I'm kidding. He's one of our field reps. I just like to give him a hard time. So at any rate, we're glad you're here. I know everybody wants to know about the drought assistance that's available, and I'm glad we've got Marty here with the FSA, because if I say something wrong, he can correct me to make sure I'm getting it right. First off, we've got these handouts that kind of tell you all about the different programs that we have. And so I would encourage you, if you don't already have one, make sure you get one of those handouts, and that can give you some details, and then Marty can peruse that and make sure that we're putting out accurate information. Obviously, I want to thank the judge for being here today. The mayor, thank you, sir, so much for coming out today. Andy Van Gilders, our extension agent, you all know, and our Clay County Cattlemen's Association, Gerald Hartsfield, thank you for being here, appreciate it. And we do have also some state information. Now, y'all may already know that the governor released $2 million for some drought assistance. It's been pretty, heavily, the volume of applications was pretty heavy. So initially we thought that money might equate to about $65 a head. As it turns out, it's going to be spread pretty thin. There were a whole lot of applications, so I don't know what that's going to figure out to right now, but it's every little bit helps. And so there are some state assistance available too, in addition to the federal assistance, and I just wanted to mention that because we're all in this together. Before we left to come home for the August district break, the House passed a $383 million disaster relief bill. Most importantly, it did a couple of things. One, I guess you might say it refunded the livestock indemnity program. What happened with the livestock indemnity program in the 2008 Farm Bill was, in order for them to save money, they basically had a provision in there that it would run out a year early. The bill's not supposed to expire until September 30th of this year. But actually, to save some money, they ran that 5 years instead of 6 years. And then lo and behold, we have a big drought, and now we're out of money in the livestock indemnity program. So what we did was we had to go in there in this drought assistance package and retroactively fund the current year, or the previous year, and then the current fiscal year. So we did 2 years. It equated to about $383 million. So the livestock indemnity program has been refunded, and then there were some other things, other programs as well. And I'll go over the NAP program. You may be familiar with the NAP program, Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program, and that applies here. Emergency Loan Program applies here. The Disaster Set Aside. This information is available at the FSA office, the County Extension Office. The Cattlemen's Association has this information on their website. I believe even the NRCS has it on theirs. And why I say that is because this is just a huge effort. Every agency we can think of is involved to try and make sure that you get the forms that you need to apply and get the information that you need. Now, I say you need these forms to apply, but the application windows, I think all of them, Marty may clarify this, but I think that the window of opportunity is already closed for applications. So I guess what we can do is just to kind of track the status of your applications at this point. I think every one of the dates is lapsed. Okay. So what we would be able to do then is working with your FSA office is to try and just kind of track the progress of your applications. If you're having some problems, let us know, we can help. But there's a lot of resources available. The CRP, if you don't know on CRP, anybody that's enrolled in CRP, there's a provision to allow for haying and grazing right now if you're under a CRP contract, but there will be a pro rata portion paid back to you to offset the cost. So I think it's 25%.
It will drop to 10% on certain.
Okay. Okay. So you can't just go in there and hay and graze on it and still get the full amount of your CRP contract. They're going to prorate it, but it's down to 10% as opposed to, initially it was 25%. So, so that's good. And then you got the SURE program, which the 08 Farm Bill is still authorized. That's the Supplemental Revenue Assistance Payment Program. The Livestock Forage Disaster Program. ELAP, Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish. And I mentioned the Livestock Indemnity Program, and then there's another tree assistance program, which probably is not going to be all that big a deal here. But at any rate, a number of programs. You may or may not have applied for any of those, but if you have applied and you need some help, kind of like I said, with tracking your application, the FSA office can help you, we'll help you, whatever you need, that's why we're here. But I want to talk to you, in addition to what's going on with the disaster assistance package that the House passed, I want to bring you up to speed on the Farm Bill and kind of what that's all about, how it looks, what we've done at this point with the Farm Bill in the House. The Senate version of the Farm Bill, I think was terrible. And probably most of us in this room would agree, and simply because from a Mid-South perspective, it was very much a cookie-cutter approach with a Midwestern model for crop insurance. And that was the Senate version. Didn't take into consideration anything at all about particularly rice production, but intensive irrigation requirements that Mid-South producers have. And so the House version cleaned up a lot of that. Now that was due in large part to the fact that we had a Farm Bill field hearing, and some of you may have attended that in Jonesboro on campus at ASU, and it was one of 4 in the nation. It was very well attended. In fact, in spite of the fact that we had perfect weather and farmers were in the field planting, because we had a pretty early planting window, we still had, what, 350 farmers there. It was really a well-attended, well-done hearing. And why that matters is because there were some members on that panel that really needed to hear from Mid-South producers. And the takeaway from that is that one size doesn't fit all. We have to be careful that we don't adopt a one-size-fits-all approach to our policy and continue to hear great things from the chairman of the Ag Committee and the committee staff about what a great presentation the Arkansas producers gave. Now, there were 10 panelists, 10 witnesses in the hearing. I'm trying to get all 10 of them to be Arkansas producers, but in fairness, it was a super regional, one of 4 in the nation, so they had a pretty broad area that they allowed for folks to come in. And so we had 5 of the 10 that were from Arkansas. Did a great job, and by all accounts, it was the best of the 4 National Farm Bill field hearings that we had. So Arkansas continues to do a great job in articulating our positions on agriculture, and it was a great opportunity. That was important to develop the House version of the Farm Bill, which has a much better appreciation for the diversity of agriculture and production that exists in this country. And the first district is kind of a microcosm of that. In fact, Clay County is sort of indicative of that diversity. A lot of cattle, a lot of row crop production, and so that's been taken into consideration. Probably the most important thing, the biggest question we get is what happened with the direct payment. The direct payment essentially went away as we know it. There is now in place that is sort of geared toward Mid-South production mechanisms called price loss coverage that is sort of reminiscent of the old target price that y'all probably remember. It's now called a trigger price, but it's got a different mechanism there that sets that trigger price. And right now, currently, using rice as an example, what they've done is taken the average of the Texas A&M cost of production and the ERS cost of production, average the two, and for rice it's set at $14.50 a ton, or a hundredweight rather, and then 85% is the rate. So what we're going to do going forward is use a 5-year rolling average rather than the old 20-year. So that takes into consideration you're not seeing the low end 20 years ago was considerably different. You know, those numbers look a heck of a lot better now. So we're using a 5-year rolling average, the Olympic averaging, where you take out the high and the low, and you take the 3 in the middle, and that's how you arrive at that trigger price. So you'll see kind of a real-world basis for it. Primarily, I'm going to say rice producers are going to want to opt into the price loss coverage, but Mid-South producers in general will probably look more favorably on that. They still have the option to go the crop insurance route if they want to, but you've got one opportunity to opt in for the life of this farm bill. So it's a 5-year bill. If you say I'm going to go with price loss coverage, you're in for 5 years. If you say I want to go with crop insurance, you're in for 5 years. But you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. You could say I want, you know, these acres over here to be in the PLC program, and I want these acres over here to be. You can work that out with the FSA. I want to, you know, opt in on crop insurance over here. It's 5 years. I'm looking, making sure I'm not saying anything wrong. He's the one keeping me straight. So you do have some flexibility there. If you're heavily irrigating, I'm going to say in our neck of the woods we would probably stick with the PLC, but that's a decision y'all would make. As much corn acres as we have now, you may see some people sort of kind of venture into crop insurance, but since we're so heavily irrigated, it may not. But that gives you the option to make that determination. And then there's been a lot of consolidation in some of these programs, particularly in conservation, and that we derived a heck of a lot of savings out of that. And then we did about $16.5 billion cut in nutrition. So all in all, a pretty good farm bill. Certainly not perfect, but these circumstances are tough, and doing the best we can to come up with a policy that works well for everybody. And I really think this particular piece of legislation helps kind of build a bridge to a free market approach that allows greater flexibility on not only on your part but everybody else. And where we are right now with the Farm Bill, we passed it out of committee on a 35 to 11 vote. Now, I just tell you, that is a remarkable bipartisan accomplishment in this environment. So we had 11 no votes out of 46. Not too bad. So we felt pretty good about going out of committee that we would, you know, get pretty quick consideration on the floor. But leadership on both sides doesn't want a farm bill. One side says we're not spending enough in nutrition, and one side says we're not cutting enough. And so we're at a little bit of an impasse with leadership, and it's kind of funny how they're on the same side in terms of not bringing the farm bill to the floor, but they're at odds about why. And the one thing they can agree on is really neither side, from a leadership perspective, wants it. But I can say that I'm pretty confident that 218 members, at the very least, want a farm bill, and we want it quickly. And so there are two things working in our favor. One is the fact that all the members went home in the month of August, and if they represent agricultural districts, or if they have any agriculture at all in their district, they're going to probably get beat up because we haven't got a farm bill yet. And when they come back in September, they may sort of change their position a little bit and recognize the need for a farm bill. I hope that that's the case. The other scenario is that we exercise a discharge petition, and that is sort of to bypass leadership. That's a rules provision that allows us to bypass leadership and bring it to the floor without their consent. They don't have to sign off on it. If we get enough signatures for the discharge petition, it automatically comes to the floor. I hope it doesn't come to that. I've signed the discharge petition so that we can if we need to, but I'm hoping cooler heads will prevail and folks will recognize that, in fact, we do need to get a farm bill passed, and that we can get it done and get it done quickly. From a conferencing standpoint, there are still some discrepancies with our version in the Senate, but I think the committee staffs have been working very closely so that if we can't go to conference, it will be conferenced very, very quickly, and we can reconcile those differences quickly and then get it back in both chambers and vote on and send it to the president. So that's where we're at right now, and I'm going to be as optimistic as I can be and say that we can get it done. I know the clock is ticking, but we're going to work hard on it. So that said, any questions y'all have? If I can't answer them, either Chris or Marty may be able to step in and answer. Yes, sir.
How much, what percentage of this farm bill actually pertains to the farmer and agriculture?
Roughly about 20%. The bulk of it is nutrition.
Well, they always complain about the farmers this and all this, and the farm bill's so high. Why do they not take this part of nutrition and other things out of there and put it somewhere else?
Well, we've talked about that, and there's a whole lot of folks that have talked about decoupling the farm bill from a nutrition bill or a food bill, whatever you might want to call it. But in either case, I don't think you'd ever get them passed. Because on one side, you've got people who want to spend more in nutrition, and the other side would not support it, and vice versa. You've got folks that understand the need to support agriculture, but if you take the two apart, there's not the votes to pass either one of them on their own. So they kind of have to be put together. We have discussed that at length about the possibility of doing just that, and it would be very, very difficult to actually get a farm bill without being coupled with food and nutrition.
Would it be any harder than get a farm bill than we're having now? We don't have one yet.
No, we probably wouldn't even attempt a farm bill in that scenario. I mean, it would be, I don't know, but it's been talked about a lot over the last year. And there's a high degree of frustration, I think, on both sides. But, you know, from our perspective, if you're going to take essentially 38% cut out of the commodity title, I think it's reasonable and responsible to think that the nutrition title can bear a 4% cut. The nutrition title, food stamp beneficiaries, the number of beneficiaries has increased 247% in 10 years. 247% increase. And, you know, I really think that it's not irresponsible to try and look at every opportunity to scale back spending. And what was done with the nutrition title wasn't just taking the meat axe to the funding. It was looking at where the waste is, and there are a whole lot of loopholes that are exploited. And I want to say first off, you know, in Arkansas, these are state-administered programs that are federally funded, so the state has to administer them. But Arkansas does a really good job of administering the food stamp program compared to other states. So we don't see the exploitation of loopholes to the extent that we see in some of the big urban centers, particularly in the Northeast, Upper Midwest, and some of the major metropolitan areas. But just as an example, there is a provision to certify for eligibility. If you get a check from LIHEAP, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, you may get a check for $25, one check. And that one check for $25 automatically makes you eligible for food stamps. I mean, just because you get a $25 check. So there's no responsibility on the part of that individual who may be receiving those benefits. And why do we make that point is that because the whole point of these programs is to help folks who need it. And what you're doing by expanding this and exploiting it to the degree that is, you're actually harming the people who need it. Because you're making those resources, you're diluting the resources that should go to the people that need it, and the people that don't are taking advantage of it. That makes it more difficult to actually meet the needs of folks who are seriously in need of those programs. I think we do need nutrition programs, but they need to go where they can do the most good, and not to folks who are just taking advantage of the programs. That's the whole point. And that's good governance, that's responsible. And you know, when we're talking about this huge increase over a 10-year period of 247%, a 4% cut is not that much to ask. In fact, in this farm bill, that $16.5 billion is less than a 2% cut. I think that's reasonable. So your point is well taken. I mean, the bulk of the funding does go to nutrition title.
very little of it goes to the cattle farmer and rancher.
Right, that's
You know,
been,
we're in almost a 4-month drought situation here. You tell me that the sign up is already passed. I called the office last week and they said they didn't have no sign up and didn't nobody know anything about the sign up for federal money assistance for the cattle farm and rancher. I called Andy Van Gilder a couple of days later and he said he believed that the sign up from the state was the 29th of this month. How are we supposed to know when you're gonna sign, they're able to sign up for something?
well, the problem is and this isn't the first time I've heard that, we've been out talking to cattlemen for the last 2 weeks, and they're basically saying the same thing in other counties as well, is that if the county FSA office doesn't know to communicate that to the producer, then the producer, you know, it's not fair to think that they're gonna close the window on them. But that's exactly what's happened. So what we're working on is trying to figure out how we address that communication lag when the federal should do a much better job of letting local offices know what programs are available, when they're available, so they can communicate that to the people who need to be taking advantage of those programs. So it's not the first time we've heard that point brought up, and it's very frustrating. I know it's frustrating for you, and we're working on trying to figure out why that happened, and why they didn't communicate that with the county FSA offices.
I called, the lady told me that there was not a sign up, and that they didn't know when it would be, but if they would be the first to know it, they would.
That may be on the livestock indemnity program.
That's basically right. There were 4 programs that expired, and like Congressman talked about, 4 programs that expired in September 30th of last year. And one of those programs was the livestock feeding program that would pay you for a loss based on the U.S. drought monitor. The drought monitor would automatically make you eligible, and we could have paid you. And I met with cattlemen a couple of weeks ago and explained that to them. And that's also one of the programs in the emergency disaster legislation that Congress talking about, that they're trying to reenact that $383 million. So if it comes back, if they get that passed and comes back in, we would have a sign up at some point.
One of the things that I was pointing to, and I mentioned this before, we particularly stayed in very close touch with Arkansas Cattlemen's Association, because in fact we had a conference call with Adam McClung and Marcus Creasy, I think the day before the vote, and then let them know what that package consisted of, and then followed up with a phone call that said yes, we passed it out of the House. And so we have done everything we can do to communicate with Cattlemen's Association and our folks here in the district, and yet we were still finding that the FSA offices weren't getting that communication from the federal level. That's very frustrating, and we're going to have to figure out why the communication lag took place and why producers were not made aware of the eligibility requirements and when the windows were open for a sign-up.
We had a drought here the year before last, and we didn't get any assistance. The row crop farmer got the federal assistance, but not the cattle farmer rancher. I got one cut in hay year before last, haven't got a cut yet this year.
Yeah, I think the House version of this farm bill addresses that, does a much better job of looking at, as I said before, the diversity of ag production that exists across the country, rather than just saying program crops are a priority. They're looking at other production like livestock, cattle, dairy, poultry, and specialty crops, and trying to allocate more resources and more help with them in addition to the traditional model of program crops.
Yeah, I see when we have a disaster in overseas in some other foreign country, they get right on and give them assistance. We got a disaster right here in our own country and we're not getting nothing. That's what I see.
Oh, 2 things we're working. We've done one that's called a bill called the Frame Act. And last year when we had flooding, when we rolled out the Frame Act in concept, farmers loved it. What the Frame Act is, we call it Frame Act, it's Farm Risk Abatement and Mitigation Election. In Washington, they love acronyms so we can remember it better. But bankers like this too. What this does is allow for farmers to set aside money in this frame account It's kind of like an IRA or an HSA, but it's used to basically self-fund a disaster. So you can put as much as $10,000 a year. Is it 10 a year? It's up to $40,000 a year, and get some tax benefits for making those deposits into your frame account. And then you can draw the money out of that account to address, in a time like this, to address your own emergency relief and get some tax benefit for it. And we've rolled this out to producers over the last year and a half. The commodity groups like it, producers like it, bankers like it, because it can also serve as kind of an underlying collateral for a production loan if you've got a sufficient amount of money in your frame account. And then they also just like handling the deposit just from an interest standpoint. It's good for banks, they like it. And this allows you to kind of self-fund. You can take that money out for anything that you need to operate your farm. So if you've had a loss, whether it be in hay, forage, or whether you're, maybe some mortality in cattle, or on the row crop side, if you've had some crop damage, any number of scenarios you might be able to think of, you can take that money out for operation on your farm. And so this encourages, I think a pretty good practice, and you get some tax benefit for it as well. So have we dropped the Frame Act yet? Yes, we have dropped it, and so didn't want to introduce it as a component of the Farm Bill because I didn't want it to become a negotiating tool in the Farm Bill. So it'll be a standalone bill. And because also, we'll bring it up through Ag, but it has to also be referred to Ways and Means because it has some tax provisions in it as well. So it's fairly complex because it's not just in agriculture. We've got involved at least one other committee and maybe a third. But we're going to try and do that and give you guys another tool to help keep you in business year to year. Then the other thing that's real important that we've had some success with is the Fuels Act, and y'all may know something about this. The Fuels Act is another one of those acronyms, Farmers Undertaking Environmental Land Stewardship. It had to do with on-farm fuel storage. If you were storing in excess of 1,320 gallons of fuel on your farm, EPA came in and said you've got to build these spill prevention and containment countermeasures, and at a cost of upwards of tens of thousands of dollars. The rule was to go into effect in November of 2011. And am I the only one that's hearing that?
No, you're not the one.
The rule was to go into effect in November of 2011. And we got them to delay that rule. I wrote a letter to Lisa Jackson, who's the EPA administrator. Didn't get a response from her. We had 100 members, more than 100 members on that letter, good bipartisan support for this, asking her to reconsider that and to adopt these standards. And these standards we wrote into the bill, the Fuels Act, basically says that if you're storing below 10,000 gallons, that you would not be required to build the spill prevention and containment countermeasure structure. If you're storing between 10 and 42,000, you would be required, but you can self-certify. And then if you're storing above 42,000, that's when you bring in the third party and the PE and all this other, and you have to then certify with a considerable more expense involved in that one. But University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service studied our bill, and they said it would save Arkansas farmers alone $240 million in costs. And overall, the nation, it would save $3.36 billion. Now, in this economy, I think that $3.36 billion could go a heck of a lot farther, not being tagged to regulatory cost compliance, cost of compliance. And so that's a big win for us. And actually, it came up through transportation. I'm also on that committee, but we had to start it in waterways because it comes under the Clean Water Act. And we marked it up in the Transportation Committee. It passed on a voice vote with not a single dissenting vote. Then we moved it to the floor, and it was supported by both parties to such an extent that they brought it in on the floor under suspension of the rules, which means there's no debate, but it requires a 2/3 vote to pass it. And I say no debate, there was limited debate, but in this scenario, I controlled time, and the opposition time was a co-sponsor, so there was no opposition. So basically, we got together on the floor and talked about what a great bill it was, and it passed on a voice vote without a dissenting vote at all, and it's now on its way to the Senate. And I've talked to both of our senators, they're well aware of it, and they have assured